Elena Vasquez pressed her fingertips against the cool glass of the Lighthouse studio's curved windows, watching the evening light paint the ocean in shades of amber and rose. At 28, she had become the region's most sought-after paper conservator, but tonight, surrounded by centuries of preserved love letters, maps that had guided countless journeys home, and manuscripts that held the dreams of generations. She felt the familiar ache of loneliness settled deep in her chest. The lighthouse had been her sanctuary for 3 years now, converted into the most beautiful document restoration studio imaginable. The circular rooms spiraled upward like the chambers of a nautilus shell, each level dedicated two different aspects of her work. The main floor housed her restoration equipment microscopes that revealed the secrets hidden in paper fibers, climate-controlled chambers where damaged documents slowly healed, and countless drawers filled with archival supplies that smelled of vanilla and thyme. But it was here in the tower room where the lighthouse beams still functioned that Elena felt most at home. Surrounded by her ongoing projects, she worked by the rhythmic sweep of light that had guided ships safely to harbor for over a century. The beam would rotate every 30 seconds, casting everything in alternating moments of brilliant illumination and gentle shadow, creating a natural rhythm that seemed to match the beating of her heart. Elena possessed a gift that made her uniquely suited to her work. Synesthesia that allowed her to see emotions as colors when she touched old documents. Joy appeared as golden threads weaving through the paper fibers. Sorrow manifested as deep indigo pools that seemed to pulse with remembered pain and love. Love blazed like warm honey mixed with starlight, so beautiful it sometimes took her breath away. Tonight, she was working on a collection of Victorian correspondence that had been damaged in a house fire. As her gloved fingers carefully separated the singed pages, she could see the emotions embedded in each letter: the soft pink of a mother's worry for her traveling son, the fierce crimson of a business dispute, the gentle lavender of friendship that had lasted decades. But it was the love letters that always affected her most deeply. She would see the emotions as cascading waterfalls of gold and silver, feel the intensity of passion that had survived long after the writers had turned to dust. These letters were her favorite restoration projects, not just because of their beauty, but because they filled her with a yearning so profound it seemed to echo in the very stones of the lighthouse. Elena had always been drawn to love stories, the kind of deep, transformative connection that changed people at their very core. She had seen it in countless documents: letters from soldiers to sweethearts, decades-long correspondences between separated lovers, proposals written with shaking hands and hearts full of hope. But in her own life, such love had remained frustratingly elusive. She had tried dating, of course. There had been museum colleagues who appreciated her expertise but couldn't understand her passion. Local men who were charmed by her profession but intimidated by the intensity with which she approached everything. Artists who claimed to understand her synesthetic gift but grew tired of her spending more time with century-old documents than with them. Maybe I'm meant to be the keeper of other people's love stories, she whispered to herself, a habit she had developed during long hours alone in the lighthouse. Maybe my purpose is to preserve what others have lost. The lighthouse beam swept across her work table, illuminating a particularly damaged letter she had been avoiding. It was partially burned, the edges crumbling like autumn leaves, but she could sense something powerful about it. Even without touching it directly, she could see faint traces of golden light around its edges, the signature of a love so intense it had somehow survived flame and time. Elena carefully lifted the letter, with conservation tweezers, her heart beginning to race. The moment her tool made contact with the paper, she gasped. Colors exploded across her vision, not just gold, but brilliant silver threads shot through with starlight, warm amber that pulls like a heartbeat, and beneath it all, a longing so deep and pure it made her eyes water. This wasn't just love, this was destiny. This was the kind of once-in-a-lifetime connection that poets spent their lives trying to capture in words. With trembling hands, she began the painstaking process of stabilization, working by the lighthouse's rotating beam as she worked fragments of words became visible, waited for you beneath the lighthouse, and your letter is the light that guides me home, and most intriguingly, our love will find a way across any distance, any time. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This letter was different from any she had ever encountered. The emotions weren't just preserved in the paper, they seemed to pulse with active life, as if the love that had created them was somehow still alive, still searching, still yearning to be complete. She worked through the night, her movements growing more urgent as more words became visible. References to a lighthouse, possibly this very lighthouse, mentions of a love that transcended ordinary understanding. And strangest of all, what appeared to be a prediction. One day, someone with the gift of seeing hearts will find these words and know that love always finds its way home. As dawn approached, Elena set down her tools and stared at the partially restored letter. Her synesthesia had never reacted so strongly to any document. The colors were so vivid they seemed to dance in the morning light streaming through the lighthouse windows. And deep in her heart, she felt something she had never experienced before, a sense that this letter was somehow meant for her to find. She looked out at the ocean, now painted in soft pastels of sunrise, and felt a stirring of anticipation she couldn't explain. Somewhere out there, she was certain, was someone connected to this letter. Someone who might hold the key to the mystery that had kept her awake all night. Someone who might finally be the answer to the longing that had lived in her heart for so long. The lighthouse beam had stopped its rotation with the coming of day. But Elena felt as though something new had begun to shine in her life. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling it beat with a rhythm that seemed to match the waves against the rocks below, and whispered a prayer to whatever force had brought this mysterious letter into her care. "Help me find the story," she breathed. "Help me understand what this means." Outside, the morning gulls began their calls, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of a car approaching along the lighthouse road. Elena's heart skipped. Unexpectedly, though she couldn't say why, it was as if the very air around her had suddenly become charged with possibility. The sound of gravel crunching under tires drew Elena away from her work table. She rarely had visitors this early in the morning, and never unscheduled ones. Her studio appointments were typically arranged weeks in advance, as her reputation for delicate restoration work had spread throughout New England. She descended the lighthouse stairs, her footsteps echoing in the circular stone chamber, and paused at the heavy oak door that served as the studio's entrance. Through the frosted glass panels, she could see the silhouette of a tall figure, and something about his posture, the way he stood with quiet patience rather than urgent demand, made her heart flutter unexpectedly. Elena opened the door and found herself looking into the most extraordinary pair of dark eyes she had ever seen. The man standing on her doorstep was perhaps in his early 30s, with black hair that caught the morning light and gentle features that spoke of mixed heritage. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. In his hands, he held a weathered leather satchel that looked like it had traveled the world. "I'm sorry to arrive without an appointment," he said, his voice carrying the warm cadence of someone who had spent time in many places but called nowhere home. "I'm Marcus Chen. I heard you might be able to help with some family documents that were damaged in a flood." The moment he spoke his name, Elena felt something extraordinary happen. Her synesthetic gift, usually triggered only by touching old documents, suddenly blazed to life. She could see colors around him, warm gold threaded with silver, the same combination she had seen in the mysterious letter upstairs. Her breath caught in her throat. "Ah, yes, of course," she managed, stepping back to let him enter. "Please. Come in. I'm Elena Vasquez." As Marcus crossed the threshold into the Lighthouse studio, Elena noticed the way he moved with the careful awareness of someone who noticed details, who saw beauty in unexpected places. His eyes immediately went to the curved walls lined with preservation equipment, the spiral staircase leading up to the lighthouse beam, the carefully organized chaos of centuries-old documents awaiting restoration. "This is incredible," he breathed, his voice filled with genuine awe. "I've never seen anything like it. You've created something magical here." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Most people saw her studio as cluttered or overly academic, but Marcus seemed to understand instinctively what she had built here, a sanctuary where the past could be preserved and honored. The lighthouse was decommissioned in the 1960s. She found herself explaining, though she rarely shared the studio's history with clients. The Coast Guard sold it to a private owner who couldn't figure out what to do with it. When I saw the listing 3 years ago, I knew it was perfect for document conservation. The steady temperature, the isolation from traffic vibration, the way the light moves through the space, and the romance of it, Marcus added softly, his eyes meeting hers, working surrounded by all these love stories, keeping the lighthouse beam alive. There's something poetic about it. Elena's heart skipped. He understood, without explanation, without lengthy justification. He simply understood what this place meant to her. "What kind of documents do you need help with?" she asked, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs she kept for client consultations. Marcus set his leather satchel on the small table between them and carefully withdrew a collection of water-damaged papers. Even from a distance, Elena could see they were old, the telltale cream color of aged paper, the careful script of someone who had learned to write with a fountain pen. "These belong to my grandmother," Marcus explained, his voice growing softer. "She passed away last month and left me her house here in Maine. I found these in a trunk in the attic, but there was a leak in the roof that I didn't know about. By the time I discovered them, the water damage was extensive." He paused, looking down at the papers with an expression of such tender longing that Elena felt her heart squeeze in sympathy. "She used to tell me stories about a great love affair when she was young, but she would never give me details. She'd just get this distant look in her eyes and say that some stories were too beautiful and too painful to share. I think these might be letters from that time." Elena's breath caught. "May I?" When Marcus nodded, she carefully lifted the top document with conservation tweezers. The moment the metal made contact with the paper, her world exploded in color. The same golden light she had seen in the mysterious letter upstairs blazed before her eyes, so bright and pure it made her gasp aloud. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, leaning forward with concern. Elena looked up at him, her eyes wide with wonder. "I have synesthesia," she explained. "I can see emotions in old documents as colors. And these," she gestured at the damaged papers. "These are some of the most emotionally intense documents I've ever encountered." Marcus's expression shifted from concern to fascination. "What do you see?" "Love," Elena whispered. "The deepest, most powerful love I've ever witnessed, but also longing, separation," as if she paused, studying the colors swirling around the papers, as if the story was never finished. She saw something change in Marcus's expression, a flash of recognition that made her pulse quicken. "There's something else," he said quietly. "These aren't just random family letters. My grandmother told me, right before she died, that I needed to find the other half of the story. She said there were letters that had been separated somehow, and that finding them again was important, not just for understanding her past, but for my future." Elena's hands began to tremble. Slowly, she set down her tweezers and looked directly into Marcus's dark eyes. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Rose Chen, but her maiden name was Rose Morrison." Elena felt the world tilt around her. "Marcus, I need to show you something." She led him up the spiral staircase to the lighthouse beam room, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the way the morning light caught in his dark hair, the gentle strength in his movements. When they reached the top, she gestured to her work table where the partially restored letter lay under its preservation light. "I found this last night in a collection of fire-damaged documents. Look at the signature." Marcus approached the table, and Elena watched his face as he read the visible words. She saw the exact moment he recognized the handwriting, the way his expression shifted from curiosity to wonder to something deeper, a recognition that seemed to go beyond mere family history. "Your devoted Thomas," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, this is my grandfather's handwriting, my grandmother's first love, the one she never talked about. But how?" "They were separated somehow," Elena said softly. "The letters got divided, scattered. Your grandmother kept some, but others ended up in estate sales, private collections. This one came to me through a house fire in Vermont." Marcus looked up at her, and in his eyes Elena saw the same golden warmth her synesthesia showed her in. "The letters, you've been looking for these your whole career, haven't you?" "Not just any love letters, but these specific ones," Elena nodded, hardly daring to breathe. "I never knew I was looking for them specifically, but yes, every time I restore a love letter, I feel like I'm searching for something. And when I touched your grandmother's papers, when I saw the colors," she gestured helplessly, "they match perfectly. They're two halves of the same story." Marcus stepped closer to her, close enough that she could catch the scent of his cologne. Something warm and woody that reminded her of distant travels and quiet moments of reflection. "Elena," he said, her name sounding like poetry in his voice. "I don't think this is a coincidence. My grandmother's house. It's less than a mile from here. She's lived there for 70 years, and I've been visiting since I was a child. How is it that we've never met?" "Maybe," Elena whispered, her heart racing as she looked into his eyes. "We weren't ready to meet until now. Maybe the letters had to find their way to us first." The lighthouse beam chose that moment to pulse an automatic tests that happened each morning, checking the system's functionality. For just a moment, they were bathed in brilliant light, and Elena saw Marcus's expression transform into something that made her knees weak. Wonder, recognition, and underneath it all, the beginning of something that looked remarkably like the love she had been reading about in letters for years. "Will you help me restore them all?" Marcus asked quietly. "Help me piece together their story." "Yes," Elena breathed, knowing that she was agreeing to much more than a restoration project. She was agreeing to dive headfirst into a mystery that seemed to be pulling them together with invisible threads of destiny. As the lighthouse beam faded back to its daytime dormancy, Elena felt something shift in the very air around them. The longing that had lived in her heart for so long was transforming into something else entirely: anticipation, excitement, and the thrilling certainty that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Over the following week, Marcus began arriving at the Lighthouse studio each morning just as the sun painted the ocean in shades of pearl and gold. He would bring coffee in a thermos that they shared while Elena explained the intricate process of document restoration, and she would watch the way his eyes lit up when she showed him how to read the subtle signs of age and damage in paper fibers. The key, Elena explained on their third morning together, carefully demonstrating how to separate two pages that had been water damaged and pressed together, is patience. You can't force the paper to release its secrets. You have to wait. Create the right conditions and let it happen naturally. Marcus leaned closer to watch her work, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Like trust, he murmured, like the way people open up to each other. Elena's hands stilled on her tools. She looked up to find Marcus watching her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. Exactly like that, she whispered. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, working side by side in the lighthouse's circular rooms. Marcus proved to have a natural talent for the detailed work, his photographer's eye helping him spot subtle details that others might miss. More importantly, he approached each document with the same reverence Elena felt, understanding that they were holding pieces of human hearts in their hands. As they worked, they talked. Elena learned that Marcus had spent the last decade traveling as a freelance photographer, documenting disappearing cultures and forgotten places around the world. His images had appeared in National Geographic and Smithsonian Magazine, but he spoke about his work with a weariness that suggested the constant travel had begun to feel more like running away than seeking adventure. I kept thinking the next place would be where I belonged, he told her as they carefully cleaned decades of dust from a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The next assignment, the next culture, the next landscape. But after grandmother died and I inherited her house, I realized I've been searching for home in all the wrong places. Elena understood that feeling more deeply than she could express. I felt that way until I found the lighthouse, she said softly, like I was meant to be somewhere specific, but I didn't know where. Their eyes met across the work table, and Elena felt that now familiar surge of golden warmth that seemed to happen every time Marcus looked at her with his full attention. Maybe, Marcus said quietly, some people are meant to find their place through finding their person. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Elena felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away from his gaze. Instead, she let herself really see him, the gentle strength in his features, the way his dark eyes seemed to hold depths of understanding, the careful way he handled not just the fragile documents but every interaction between them. By the end of their first week working together, they had successfully restored nearly half of the letters. The story emerging from the carefully preserved words was heartbreaking in its beauty. Rose Morrison and Thomas Chen had met in 1952 when he was a young soldier on leave, and she was working at the local lighthouse as part of a Coast Guard training program. Their love had been immediate and profound, but Thomas had been deployed overseas before they could marry. Listen to this, Elena said, reading from a letter dated October 15, 1952. My dearest Rose, I carry your photograph over my heart, and when the nights are cold and I feel furthest from home, I look at your smile and remember what it felt like to stand with you in the lighthouse beam. You told me that light always finds its way through the darkness, and I believe you. Our love is that light, and no distance can diminish it. Marcus had grown quiet as Elena read, and when she looked up, she saw tears in his eyes. He really loved her, he whispered. I always wondered. Grandmother would get so sad when she talked about her youth. I thought maybe she had built it up in her memory, made it more romantic than it actually was. But this, Elena reached across the table and, without thinking, covered his hand with hers. The contact sent electricity through her entire body, But more than that, she could see colors blazing around their joined hands, the same golden light that permeated every letter they had restored. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice trembling, with the enormity of what she was seeing. "When I touch the letters, I see your grandmother's emotions as gold and silver light. But when I touch you," she paused, hardly daring to continue, "I see the same colors, exactly the same." Marcus turned his hand palm up beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "What does that mean?" Elena's heart was racing so fast she felt lightheaded. "I think it means that what your grandparents felt for each other, it's still alive somehow, still present. And maybe," she looked up into his eyes, feeling as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump, "maybe we're meant to finish their story." The lighthouse beam chose that moment to flicker on for its evening cycle, bathing them in warm, golden light. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles that made her entire body sing with awareness. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've never believed in destiny. I've traveled the world documenting cultures that do, but I always thought love was just chance, good timing, and compatible personalities. And now?" Elena whispered. Marcus lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the simple gesture making her heart flutter like a bird in her chest. "Now I think some forces are bigger than logic. I think some connections transcend ordinary understanding." They worked through the evening by the lighthouse beam, their conversation growing deeper and more personal with each passing hour. Elena found herself sharing things she had never told anyone about the loneliness of her gift, about how seeing other people's emotions preserved in documents had made her both yearn for love and fear it might never live up to the intensity she witnessed in her work. Marcus told her about the emptiness he had felt while traveling, the way he would photograph couples in distant villages and feel a hollow ache in his chest, wondering if he would ever find the kind of connection that could anchor him to one place, one person, one life worth building. "I used to think my grandmother was foolish for never remarrying," Marcus admitted as they carefully pressed another restored letter between sheets of conservation paper. "She could have had a good life with someone else, but now I understand. When you've felt a love that powerful, anything less feels like settling." Elena nodded, thinking of all the men she had dated who had seemed perfectly fine on paper but had left her feeling hollow. "I kept wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't be satisfied with normal, healthy relationships. Maybe," Marcus said softly, "you were meant for something extraordinary." Their eyes met across the table, and Elena felt the air between them crackle with possibility. The lighthouse beam swept across their workspace, illuminating the restored letters spread between them, evidence of a love that had survived decades of separation and loss. "Marcus," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of waves against the lighthouse's foundation, "I need to tell you something. Working with you this week, it's been the happiest I've ever been in my life." Marcus stood slowly, never breaking eye contact, and walked around the table to where Elena sat. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, the simple touch sending shivers through her entire body. "Elena," he said, his voice warm and sure, "I came here looking for my grandmother's story, but I think I found something more important." "What's that?" she breathed. "My own beginning," he whispered, leaning down until his forehead rested gently against hers. Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the rightness of the moment, the way her entire body seemed to recognize his presence as something it had been waiting for. Around them, the lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation, just as it had when Rose and Thomas first fell in love 70 years ago. In the distance, she could hear the eternal rhythm of the ocean against the rocks, a sound that seemed to match the beating of her heart as she realized that everything in her life had been leading to this moment, to this man, to this love that felt both brand new and as ancient as the tides. The next evening, Marcus arrived at the lighthouse just as the sun began to set, carrying a picnic basket and wearing an expression of nervous excitement that made Elena's heart skip. "I thought," he said, his voice slightly breathless as if he had been rehearsing the words, "maybe we could take a break from the letters tonight. Have dinner up in the lighthouse beam while we watch the sunset." Elena felt warmth spread through her entire body. Over the past week, their work sessions had grown increasingly charged with unspoken tension, every accidental brush of fingers when passing documents, every moment of shared wonder over a particularly beautiful passage in the letters. Every time their eyes met across the work table, all of it had been building to something that felt inevitable and terrifying and absolutely right. "I'd love that," she whispered. They climbed the spiral staircase together, Marcus carrying the picnic basket and Elena acutely aware of his presence behind her. The way his breathing seemed to match the rhythm of her own heartbeat. When they reached the lighthouse beam room, Elena gasped in delight. Marcus had somehow arranged for the space to be decorated with strings of warm white lights that twinkled like stars against the curved walls. The harsh work lights had been dimmed, and in their place, dozens of pillar candles cast dancing shadows across the restored letters that lined the room. "When did you?" Elena began, but Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could see the way the candlelight reflected in his dark eyes. "I may have had some help from Mrs. Patterson at the hardware store," he admitted with a smile that made her knees weak. "She apparently has strong opinions about young men who don't properly court the ladies they're falling for." Elena's breath caught. "Falling for?" Marcus set down the picnic basket and turned to face her fully, his expression growing serious. "Elena, I know we've only known each other for a week, but I can't pretend this is just about the letters anymore. Every morning when I drive up to the lighthouse, my heart starts racing before I even see you. Every evening when I leave, I count the hours until I can come back." Elena felt her pulse flutter like a trapped bird. "Marcus, I know it's fast," he continued, stepping closer. "I know it might seem crazy. But standing here, surrounded by evidence of my grandparents' love, I can't help thinking that some connections are stronger than time or logic or careful planning." The lighthouse beam began its evening rotation, sweeping across the room and bathing them in golden light. Elena looked up at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw her own wonder and longing reflected in his eyes. "It doesn't seem crazy," she whispered. "It seems like coming home." Marcus reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was warm and gentle and electric, sending shivers down her spine. "Elena," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "May I kiss you?" Elena's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I've been hoping you would ask," she breathed. Marcus leaned down slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, until his lips were barely a breath away from her own. Elena could feel the warmth of his exhale, could see the way his pupils dilated in the candlelight, could smell the subtle cologne that had become achingly familiar over their week of working together. Just as their lips were about to meet, the lighthouse beam swept across them again, and Marcus paused, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just like my grandparents," he whispered against her lips. "Their first kiss was in this lighthouse beam. Then we're exactly where we're supposed to be," Elena whispered back. When Marcus finally closed the distance between them, Elena felt her entire world shift and realign. His lips were soft and warm and tasted faintly of the coffee they had shared that morning. The kiss started gentle, tentative, but as Elena's arms wound around his neck and she pressed closer to him, it deepened into something that made her feel like she was drowning in the most beautiful way possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena kept her eyes closed for a moment, trying to memorize every sensation, the way Marcus's hands trembled slightly against her face, the way her entire body seemed to hum with electricity, the way the world felt different now, brighter and more alive than it had just moments before. Ah, she whispered, opening her eyes to find Marcus watching her with an expression of such tender it made her heart ache. Oh, he agreed softly, his thumb tracing patterns across her cheekbone. They stood there for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, while around them the lighthouse beam continued its ancient dance and the candles cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across the walls. Dinner, Marcus finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I promised you dinner. Elena laughed softly, the sound musical in the candlelit space. I'm not sure I can eat anything. My heart is beating too fast. Then we'll take it slow, Marcus murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. We have all night. He unpacked the picnic basket, revealing an array of Elena's favorite foods somehow. In just a week, he had noticed her preferences with the same attention to detail he brought to everything else. There was the lavender honey she liked in her tea, the artisanal bread from the bakery in town, soft cheese and fresh fruit, and a bottle of wine that caught the candlelight like liquid amber. They settled on the thick blanket Marcus had brought, leaning against the curved wall of the lighthouse with the restored letters spread around them like blessing from the past. Elena tucked herself against Marcus's side, marveling at how perfectly she fit there, how natural it felt to rest her head on his shoulder while he traced absent patterns on her arm. Read to me, she said softly, from the letters. I want to hear their story in your voice. Marcus reached for one of the more recent restorations, dated December 1952. My darling Rose, he began, his voice warm and rich in the candlelit space. The snow here reminds me of the way the lighthouse beam looked through the frost on your windows that last night we spent together. Everything beautiful I see makes me think of you. I carry your letters everywhere, and when the other soldiers complain about the cold or the food or how far we are from home, I think about how lucky I am to have something so precious to return to. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the words wash over her. When Marcus read in his grandfather's voice, she could see the emotions even more clearly, not just the love and longing, but hope, determination, a faith that transcended distance and uncertainty. Keep going, she whispered. I dream about the life we'll build together, Marcus continued. A house near the ocean where you can still see the lighthouse beam from our bedroom window. Children who will grow up hearing the sound of waves and knowing they are loved beyond measure. Growing old together, sitting on our front porch and watching the sun set over the water, still holding hands after 50 years of marriage. Marcus's voice caught slightly on the last words, and Elena looked up to see tears in his eyes. They never got that, he said quietly. Thomas died in Korea 6 months later. Grandmother kept his letters for 70 years, but she never got the life they dreamed about together. Elena sat up and turned to face him fully, her heart breaking for the young woman who had loved so deeply and lost so much. But maybe, she said softly, maybe love like that doesn't just disappear. Maybe it finds a way to continue to complete itself in ways we don't understand. Marcus reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers, like us finding each other. Like us finding each other, Elena agreed. Like you inheriting the house just when I needed help with the letters. like your grandmother keeping these documents safe for 70 years until we were both ready to understand what they meant. The lighthouse beam swept across them again, and Elena felt something shift in the air between them. Marcus was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, his dark eyes reflecting the candlelight and something deeper, a recognition, a certainty, a love that seemed to expand beyond the boundaries of their short acquaintance. Elena, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I think I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you in the lighthouse doorway, and I've been falling deeper every day since. Elena's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. Marcus, she breathed, I think I've been waiting for you my whole life. I think every letter I've restored, every love story I've preserved, has been preparing me to recognize what I felt. The moment I met you, Marcus leaned closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. What did you feel? Coming home, she whispered, like every journey I'd ever taken had been leading me back to you. This time, when Marcus kissed her, Elena felt something beyond desire, beyond attraction, beyond even the deep connection they had been building over their week together. She felt destiny unfolding, felt the universe rearranging itself around this moment, this man, this love that seemed to have been written in the stars long before either of them was born. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the lighthouse beam was sweeping across them in a steady rhythm that seemed to match the beating of their hearts. Around them, 70 years of love letters bore witness to another chapter beginning, another story of love finding its way home at last. 3 weeks later, on a night when the autumn storms had turned the ocean wild and magnificent, Elena and Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. They had been working late in the lighthouse beam room, carefully restoring the final batch of letters from Rose's collection, when Elena noticed something strange about one particular envelope. It was thicker than the others, and when she held it up to the light, she could see the outline of something more than just paper inside. Marcus, she called softly, her voice tight with excitement. Look at this. He moved to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders as they both examined the envelope. Elena could feel the warmth of his body against her back, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the salt air that clung to everything in the lighthouse. Over the past 3 weeks, such casual touches had become natural between them, each one sending sparks through her entire nervous system. There's something else in here, Elena murmured, carefully opening the envelope with conservation tools. Something that isn't paper. What she withdrew made them both gasp. It was a small brass key, tarnished with age but still solid, still beautiful. Attached to it by a thin chain was a heart-shaped locket, and wrapped around both was a piece of paper that looked different from the others, newer somehow, though still decades old. With trembling hands, Elena unfolded the paper and read aloud. December 15, 1953. My dearest Thomas, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened and you are not coming home to me. The telegram arrived today, and though my heart is shattered beyond repair, I want you to know that our love will never die. I have hidden this key and locket in our special place, along with a letter that contains all the words I never got to say. If there is any justice in this universe, someday our love will find a way to complete itself. The key opens the box beneath the lighthouse beam, where I have placed my heart's deepest secrets. May whoever finds this understand that true love transcends time, death, and all the boundaries that seem to separate us. Your devoted Rose. Elena's voice broke on the final words. She looked up at Marcus, who had grown very still behind her, his hands tightening slightly on her shoulders. There's a box, she whispered, hidden somewhere in this room. They began searching immediately, examining every stone in the lighthouse's circular wall, every floorboard, every corner where something might have been concealed for 70 years. The storm outside seemed to intensify as they searched, wind howling around the lighthouse and rain lashing against the windows, as if the very elements were urging them forward. It was Marcus who found it, behind a loose stone near where the lighthouse beam's mechanism was housed. The hiding place was so clever, so carefully concealed, that it had gone unnoticed through decades of lighthouse maintenance and Elena's own 3 years of working in the space. "Elena," Marcus breathed, his voice filled with wonder. "Here." She moved to kneel beside him as he carefully withdrew a small wooden box, simple but beautiful, carved with roses and clearly made by loving hands. The brass key fit perfectly, and when Marcus turned it, they both held their breath. Inside was a treasure trove that made Elena's synesthetic gift blaze to life. There were more letters, these ones written in Rose's hand but never sent. There were photographs of Rose and Thomas together, her in a simple white dress, him in his military uniform, both of them radiant with young love, and at the very bottom, wrapped in silk that had somehow survived the decades, was a small velvet box. Marcus opened it with shaking hands, and they both gasped at what lay inside. It was an engagement ring, simple but beautiful, clearly chosen with care and saved for. With a soldier's modest pay, tucked beneath the ring was one final letter, sealed with wax and marked simply, "For the love that comes after." She knew, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. Somehow she knew that their love would continue, would find a way to complete itself. Marcus's hands were trembling as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. His voice was rough with emotion as he began to read. "To whoever finds this box, to whoever has been called to restore our letters and preserve our love, know that you have been chosen for something sacred. Thomas and I believe that love like ours doesn't end with death, that it finds a way to return, to finish what was begun. If you are reading this, if you have felt the pull of our story, if our words have awakened something in your own heart, then you are the answer to my prayers. Take this ring, not as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of love's eternal nature. Let it represent the promise that true love always finds its way home, whether in this life or the next, and know that somewhere, in whatever realm souls like Thomas and I inhabit, we are dancing with joy that our love has helped kindle yours. With all our blessings and deepest gratitude, Rose Morrison Chen." Elena was sobbing openly now, overwhelmed by the beauty of it, the impossible perfection of finding this message that seemed written specifically for them. Marcus set the letter aside and turned to face her, his own eyes bright with tears. "Elena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I love you. I love you so much it feels like my heart might explode with it. I love your brilliant mind and your gentle hands and the way you see colors and emotions. I love how you make me feel like I've finally found the place I'm supposed to be." Elena reached for him, her hands framing his face, marveling at the strength in his features and the tenderness in his eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love you so much it scares me. I love how you understand my work, how you make me laugh, how you've shown me what it means to be truly seen and cherished by another person." Marcus reached for the engagement ring, holding it up so it caught the lighthouse beam as it swept across them. "Elena Vasquez," he said, his voice strong and sure despite the tears on his cheeks. "I know this is fast. I know people will say we're crazy, but standing here, surrounded by evidence that love can transcend anything, I have to ask, will you marry me? Will you help me finish the story that Rose and Thomas began?" Elena looked at the ring, simple, beautiful, blessed by a love that had waited 70 years to find its completion. She looked at Marcus, this man who had walked into her lighthouse and turned her entire world upside down with his gentle strength and deep understanding, and she felt her synesthetic gift blaze to life one final time, showing her colors around. Them both gold and silver and starlight, love so pure and true it seemed to light up the very air they breathed. Yes, she whispered, then louder, laughing through her tears. Yes, yes, Marcus, yes. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her hand all these years. And when he kissed her, with the storm raging outside and the lighthouse beam dancing around them and 70 years of love letters bearing witness to their promise, Elena felt something complete itself in the universe. The lighthouse beam swept across them as they held each other. And Elena could have sworn she saw two additional figures in the light, a young woman in a white dress and a soldier in uniform, dancing together with pure joy, finally at peace knowing their love had found a way to continue. "We're going to live here," Marcus whispered against her lips, "in the lighthouse, surrounded by all these love stories. We're going to grow old together and watch the sunset from our bedroom window and prove that some promises are stronger than death itself. Forever," Elena whispered back, the word a vow, a prayer, a celebration of love that had found its way home at last. Outside, the storm began to calm, and the lighthouse beam continued its eternal dance, guiding new ships safely to harbor, just as it had guided two hearts to each other across time, space, and the mysterious workings of destiny itself. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening when the ocean sparkled like scattered diamonds and the lighthouse beam painted golden paths across the water, Elena stood at the window of what was now their bedroom, watching Marcus walk up the path. From town, he had gone to pick up the final proofs of their wedding photographs, images that would soon join the collection of love stories preserved forever in their lighthouse home. Elena smiled as she watched him approach, still feeling the same flutter of excitement in her stomach that she had experienced that first morning when he appeared at her door. Their wedding had been small and perfect, held in the lighthouse beam room with their closest friends and family gathered around them. Elena had worn her grandmother's lace dress, and Marcus had worn his grandfather Thomas's military medal as a tribute to the love story that had brought them together. When they exchanged rings, Thomas's ring for Elena and a simple band they had chosen together for Marcus, the lighthouse beam had swept across them just as it had the night he proposed. And Elena could have sworn she felt Rose and Thomas's presence blessing their union. Now, as she watched her husband, the words still sent thrills through her heart, climb the lighthouse stairs with the easy familiarity of someone who had truly come home. Elena reflected on how completely their lives had transformed in just 10 months. Marcus had given up his travel photography to focus on heritage documentation, working with Elena to establish the Lighthouse Conservation Project, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving family documents and love letters for future generations. Their work had been featured in Smithsonian Magazine, and requests for their services came from across the country, but they had made a pact never to let success pull them away from the home they had found in each other. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus called, as he climbed the final stairs to their bedroom, using the name that still made Elena's heart skip every time she heard it. "I have something beautiful to show you." Elena turned from the window, smiling at the sight of her husband framed in their bedroom doorway. The setting sun behind her painted everything in golden light, and she watched Marcus pause, his expression growing soft with wonder as he looked at her. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, the same awe in his voice that had been there the night he first told her he loved her. "Sometimes I still can't believe you're really mine." Elena moved to him, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing close to the familiar warmth of his body. "Always yours," she murmured against his lips. in this life and whatever comes after. Marcus kissed her softly, the kind of tender, loving kiss that spoke of deep intimacy and absolute security. When they broke apart, he held up the envelope, containing their wedding photos. Are you ready to see how we look as a married couple? They settled together on their bed, the same antique fur poster that had belonged to Rose, which Marcus had found in his grandmother's attic and restored. As a surprise for their first anniversary, Elena tucked herself against Marcus's side, marveling as she always did at how perfectly she fit there, how completely right it felt to be held by him. The photographs were breathtaking. Their photographer had captured not just their faces, but the joy radiating from them, the way they looked at each other as if they were the only two people in the world. In every image, the lighthouse beam created halos of light around them, making them look like figures from a fairy tale. Look at this one, Marcus said softly, pointing to a photograph taken during their first dance. Elena gasped at what she saw in the background, barely visible but definitely there, were two additional figures dancing. A young woman in a 1950 seconds dress and a man in military uniform, transparent as mist but unmistakably present. They were there, Elena whispered, tears filling her eyes. Rose and Thomas were there, dancing at our wedding. Marcus tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Our photographer said she'd never seen anything like it. She almost didn't include the photo because she thought it might be a double exposure, but we know. Better, Elena finished. We know love doesn't end. It just finds new ways to express itself. They looked through the rest of the photographs in comfortable silence, pausing occasionally to share memories of their perfect day. Elena's favorite was a candid shot taken during the reception, she and Marcus standing at the lighthouse window, looking out at the ocean, his arm around her waist and her head on his shoulder. They looked utterly content, completely at peace, like two people who had finally found their place in the world. Elena, Marcus said after they had looked at every photograph twice, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. She looked up at him, noting the nervous excitement in his expression. What is it? Marcus reached into the nightstand drawer and withdrew a small leather journal, its pages filled with his careful handwriting. I've been writing, he said softly, about us, about Rose and Thomas, about the whale of stories connect across time. I think I want to turn it into a book. Elena's heart swelled with pride and love. Marcus, that's wonderful. What would you call it? The Memory Keeper's Heart, he said, his voice growing more confident. It would tell our story, but also Rose and Thomas's story, and maybe inspire other people to believe in love that transcends ordinary understanding. Elena sat up and kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and support into the gesture. It's perfect, she whispered against his lips, and I want to help. We could include some of the restored letters, show people what real love looks like. As night fell around them, they talked about their dreams for the future, the book they would write together, the love stories they would preserve, the family they hoped to build in their lighthouse home. Elena could see it all so clearly. Children playing in the spiral staircase, teenagers rolling their eyes at their parents' romantic story, grandchildren begging to hear about great-great-grandmother Rose and the love letters that brought there. Grandparents together. We're going to grow old together, Marcus murmured as they settled down to sleep, Elena's head on his chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, just like Thomas and Rose dreamed of doing. 50 years from now, Elena agreed sleepily, we'll still be holding hands on the porch, watching the lighthouse beam guide ships safely home. Outside their window, the lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation, a symbol of constancy in an ever-changing world. The ocean whispered against the rocks below, the same rhythm it had kept for centuries, the same sound that had lulled Rose to sleep 70 years ago when she dreamed of the love she had lost and the love that would someday continue their story. As Elena drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, she felt the profound contentment of a heart that had found its home. Her synesthetic gift had grown quiet, no longer searching for the perfect love story in other people's letters because she was living it herself. But sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleeping, she could still see colors around them, warm gold and silver starlight, love made visible. Love that would endure beyond time and space and all the small obstacles that seemed so important to ordinary hearts. The lighthouse beams swept across their bedroom one final time, and Elena smiled in her sleep, dreaming of love letters yet to be written, of a future filled with wonder, and of the perfect rightness of being exactly where she belonged, wrapped in the arms of the man who had been written in her heart long before she ever knew his name. In the morning, there would be coffee shared over the morning light, gentle kisses that tasted of forever, and another day of building their life together in the lighthouse where love stories came true. But for now, there was only the peace of two hearts beating in perfect rhythm, the whisper of the ocean breeze through their windows, and the eternal promise of the lighthouse beam that love always finds its way home, and somewhere in the space between dreams and dawn, Rose and Thomas danced one more time in the golden light, finally at peace, knowing their love had found its perfect continuation in the hearts of the couple sleeping safely in their lighthouse, surrounded by 70 years of preserved letters and the eternal promise that true love never truly ends. Sleep well, dear listener. Dream of lighthouse beams and love letters, of hearts that find their way home across time and space, and of the beautiful truth that somewhere your own perfect love story is waiting to unfold. Thank you for listening to The Memory Keepers. Heart, may your dreams be filled with golden light and the promise of love that transcends time itself. Sweet dreams, and remember, the best love stories are always the ones still being written.
you.